Scythe is one of my all-time favorite board games, and it's a game that has incredible depth for new players to explore and unpack. One of the coolest things about this game is that every time you play it, you get a little bit better, and you can see other players using strategies that you may want to adapt and use for yourself. Today, I kind of wanted to put together a strategy guide for new players that goes over some of the maybe more intermediate strategies that you might not pick up on your first playthrough in Scythe. Just as a preface for this video, this is designed for players who already have a good understanding of the base mechanics of the game. This is not an overview of the rules, but we'll be looking more at strategy. Now, I am by no means an expert or a professional at this game, but I do have about 100 games under my belt, and I have played with every faction and map combination. So I've seen the game played a few times. And the strategies that I'm going to share today are the strategies that I have used to win a majority of my games and the strategies that I see being used at higher levels of play. Now, one of the big criticisms that people have about Scythe is actually in the way that it ends. And I think this kind of common criticism gives us a pretty good insight into how beginners perceive the game, and maybe changing that mindset might help you improve your game. So, one of the most common things that I see people say is that the game ends too abruptly, that there's kind of this unsatisfying ending. The game ends too quickly before they can explore, all of the different avenues and facets of the game, which is true. The game does end before you can explore all facets of the game. But if you are surprised by the way the game ends, or if it is ending too abruptly for you, then you don't really have a grasp on the actual intent of the structure of the game. This is not a game about exploration. This is not a game about upgrading your engine to be the most powerful. That's not what's going on here. This is a strategy game, and if everybody understood when the game was going to end, then that kind of defeats the purpose. That's kind of like saying, like using chess as a comparison here. If your opponent knew exactly when the game was going to end, then that means they unraveled your strategy. If you are ending a game in the way that feels abrupt, then that is to your advantage. You don't want to be surprised by the way that the game is ending. If you're surprised by the way a game of Scythe ends, then that is really your fault. I know that sounds harsh to say, but I think it just boils down to you don't really understand the essence of what Scythe is getting at. And hopefully in today's video, I can unpack some of those strategies in the way for you to see Scythe in a different way, and to maybe help the ending feel less abrupt because you have a vision of how to get to the end of the game. Now, the players who are the best at Scythe are the ones that have developed the game sense for when the game has gone through different transitional periods in the game, and they're able to recognize when the end of the game is near. A lot of people, especially beginners, when they see that people have 2 or 3 stars on the board, they don't necessarily consider the fact that the game could be nearing its end within the next 2 or 3 turns, because you're not limited to the number of stars that you can get per turn, which may be one of the reasons why people think that the game ends so abruptly. You could have 4 stars and then have a 2-star turn getting to that 6th star. But it's also important to recognize the fact that the 6th star doesn't necessarily mean that you win the game. Now, if you are the person who places the 6th star, that gives you the most control over the outcome of the game. And this kind of gives way to 2 different strategies. The first is the race strategy, and it's arguably the strongest of the 2. Being able to place all 6 stars as fast as you possibly can prevents people from racking up a lot of points, and you're essentially banking on the fact that, just on your stars and your territories alone, you are going to win the game. And as I mentioned, this is the strongest of the two, and the factions that can race well are the best factions in the game. Uh, Now, on the contrary, there is also the stall strategy. Now, if you uh, are not able to place all 6 stars before your opponent, then you would want to have more points than your opponent, because remember, the 6 star does not necessarily mean that you win. So stalling is saying, well, I'm going to have more points than you at the end of this game. So, go ahead and get as many stars as you'd like, and trigger the end so that I win the game. You're not so much worried about how many stars you have, as opposed to how many points you have, and this kind of disincentivizes the players who um, opt for the racing strategy to end the game so quickly. Now, if you're able to finish the game in under 17 turns, then that is a good sign that you've successfully raced through the game. If it takes you any longer than that, if you're in 18 plus turns, if you're in the 20s and your turn count, then that probably means that you should swap to a stall strategy and just try to accrue as many points as you can. Now, these race strategies are really dependent on building a efficient engine and making use of every turn, particularly at the beginning of the game. You're not wasting any time. Everything that you do is designed to get a star. So every bottom row action that you do is intentionally aligned with the stars that you're trying to get. However, if you are using a stall strategy, you're going to be more dependent on your popularity and your economy. Um, you are focusing on trying to get maybe a lot of coins, you're trying to get a lot of popularity to multiply how much your territories are worth, and of course, trying to sprawl and spread out with those territories. So you're not necessarily trying to um, get some of those bottom row actions that will get you stars, but you are trying to do the bottom row actions that give you the most coin and the better economy. Now, regardless of if you are racing or stalling, having control over when the game ends is essential in higher levels of play. If you are racing, then this is obviously super, super important because you're trying to be the one to end the game fast. And if you are stalling, people know kind of the coin count and they know that they're not winning, and you have to be the one to place down the final star to ultimately, cash in on all the points that you're getting in your stall strategy. So, regardless of if you're racing or stalling, it is still really important to have a game plan as to which stars you're going to go for. There are some kind of misconceptions about which stars are the most important to go for. I've put together what I think are the most important stars here, just based off of my own personal experience and having watched, some of the higher level players kind of map out their road to victory. So when we are deciding on which stars we want to get, there are 6 that we should consider as the top priority. The first is the worker star, the next is the enlist star, the third is the mech star, the fourth is the combat star, getting both of those if you're not Saxony, and the objective star. Everything in green there is what I try to go for first. Now, uh, not all of these things are possible in 100% of games, and sometimes you'll have to rely on maybe the power star or the build star as a backup. But in most cases, those top 5 uh, will give you all 6 of your stars, considering the fact that combat gives you 2, and if you're Saxony, you can get even more. So why do I have worker at number 1 here? Well, the worker star is the easiest star to get, and it's something that everybody should be getting in every game. If you're not getting your worker star, this means you're not spreading your workers to get points at the end of the game. Regardless of if you want to play with 5 workers or 8 workers, You should always be getting the worker star because of how easy it is to get and how well workers can hold points. The next star that you should be going for is the enlist star. The enlist star is extremely important, and it's something that I would recommend that you get in pretty much every game that you play. Just getting the passive resources from your neighbor's bottom row actions can open the door for you to do a lot of different things. Enlist is probably the best bottom row action in the game, and it is pretty crazy how powerful you can become just like getting resources off of the bottom row actions of your neighbors. And getting the +2 resources for getting those enlists can really guide you forward in the game and help shore up some of the places that you're weak. The mech star, obviously, mechs are really, really important in this game because they do a lot of things. They help move your workers around, they help hold territories, they help take territories, they help combat, they help get stars. Um, so if you're making progress towards your mech star, then that also means you're making progress towards number 4, which is your combat star. And those things lead nicely into one another. The combat star is something that you should be looking for every single game. Any opportunity you see to win an easy combat, you should jump on that opportunity. Even if that means maybe derailing one of the top 3 stars for maybe a turn or two or delaying that for a turn or two, you should absolutely jump on that opportunity, especially at higher levels of play when some of those easy combats are not as easy to come by. The 5th star here is the objective star. This is kind of the most volatile star because of its unpredictable nature, right? You're given those two objective cards at the beginning of the game, and you have no control over what those things are. There are a couple of objectives that if you get them, you should do them every single time. I will talk about what some of those objectives are, but most often you're going to be able to complete that objective star. If you can't, then you can use 6 or 7 as a backup. The power star is not something that you should be shooting for in your original game plan. Like as you're trying to map out your road to victory, you shouldn't be thinking, well, I'll get the power star along the way. If you can get the 1 through 5, that's what you should be doing. If the objective star is just not feasible, and I'll talk about some of the objectives that are just not possible or that you shouldn't be doing. They are possible, but you shouldn't be doing them. If you get one of those, then the power star is a fine backup because it is helping you complete 4, right? If you are accruing and accumulating power, that will help you in those combats in the future. So it never hurts to get more power, as long as you're not derailing any of the other stars along the way. The build star, I would not recommend that you use build as a part of your set game plan at the start, mainly because of how bad building is in this game. Later on in this video, I'll talk a little bit about the resources, but building is like one of the worst bottom row actions that you can do. I would argue that it is the worst bottom row action you can do. It's basically like a poor man's enlist. You're not getting the passive effects from building those buildings in the same way that you are enlisting, and it's not something that I would recommend really anybody go for. If you know what you're doing and you have like this crazy build strategy, then more power to you. But building is not something that I would personally recommend people do because it is simply just not very good. 8, the upgrade star. If you're getting an upgrade star in your game, you're playing Scythe wrong. Upgrades are designed to help you achieve the other stars. You're not upgrading for the star, you're upgrading to optimize your engine to complete the other objectives. Having 6 upgrades on the board requiring that you have 6 before you get the stars, it's literally just slower than everything else. Um, all of the other bottom row actions only require that you do them 4 times to get the star, but upgrade, you have to do it 6 times. So you're spending more time working on a star. And if you are racing, this is especially important because that is 2 more turns. That's 2 more times that you have to click that bottom row action to get that star. Um, I would not recommend anybody go for the upgrade star even as a backup. If you are getting this star, it is because it is late in the game and you have run out of options. Which brings me to number 9, the popularity star. I have literally only ever gotten the star 1 time, and it was to complete the achievement on the digital edition. Uh, Getting all the way to 18 popularity is just not gonna happen. Like, it's pretty rare that you ever get to 13, which is tier 3. And if you're pushing, you know, 5 more popularity after the third tier, that is just wasting time. And at that point, you're probably really close to the end of the game anyway, where those turns were probably going to be best served elsewhere. So don't try to get to 18 popularity. That is not a star that's really designed to get. That is more of a I have literally no other options, so I'm going to get this star, but you pretty much always have other options. I did want to show off my own like personal statistics from the digital edition of Scythe. These are all the stars that I've ever gotten in all of the games that I've played, and as you can see, I get some of them a lot more than I get the others. And this does align pretty well with the star priority list that we talked about. Now, assigning more priority and value to some stars over other stars inherently means that some resources and terrain types are actually better than others. Um, this shift in perspective for me was one of the things that I would argue made me a significantly better player. When I started thinking about which resources I should actually be going for, I saw a lot of improvement in my game. So the 2 resources that are just far and away the best are the food and the metal, meaning that farms and mountains are going to be a primary destination when you're trying to map out the beginning parts of your game. You absolutely want to make sure that um, your engine includes farming and collecting metal. Um, as these are essential to those stars that we're talking about in our priority list, right? Our enlist star and our deploy star. You need food and metal to do those things, and those are the things that you should be prioritizing. Oil is a fine resource to use to help build that engine, but again, you should not be using oil to get a star. You should be using oil to help build the engine to get things like the enlist star and the deploy star. And I would pretty much recommend new to intermediate players never using wood. Like, if you're going to use buildings, you should probably be building buildings with a factory card or with encounter cards. Um, because spending production and spending time on getting workers to a forest, and if you're using 8 workers, spending a popularity on getting wood, that is just not a best use of your time and resources. And I would stay away from going to forests and collecting wood unless you have an objective that requires you to do so. Of course, the terrain type that allows us to do all of these things is the village, which is why I have put it at the top of the list here. While it doesn't necessarily yield resources, it does give you the tools to get that through the worker. The village is something that you want to make sure you know where it is on the board, because if you're working with 5 workers, remember we are trying to get that worker star. So if you have 5, then you need to make sure at some point you get 3 workers to a village to get you that star. So you can just hit produce, get your 3 workers, and get up to 8, easily collecting that star. So always be aware of where villages are at. Um, as workers are essential for holding points and they are essential for that worker star, which is something we should always be going for. Now, while I won't talk about all 27 objectives in this video, being able to identify which ones are good and which ones are bad are really important when trying to roadmap the beginning of your game. Uh, if you see any of these 9 objectives in the 2 that you're given, you can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that you're probably going to be able to get your objective in that game with little to no trouble. In the top left, we have Foundations of the Empire. This objective is far and away the easiest one to get, especially if you are planning on getting the worker star at some point in the game. If you are, you have a mech and 3 other workers with you to get from 5 to 8, then you are also satisfying the conditions for Foundations of the Empire once you hit produce and get your 8th worker. So this really goes well with our star priority list, and it's something that you never have to go out of your way to do. The next 6 are all of the advantage cards. If your objective says advantage, this is something that you're pretty much always going to be able to do. Spreading control over the map and holding territories is just something that you should be doing as good practice. And more often than not, you're going to be able to get 3 of the same type of territory in that spread and in that territory control. So it just rewards you for good play. In the same way, Shore Up the Shore essentially does the same thing, only it's just focused on specific tiles around the lake. Some people might argue that Shore Up the Shore is not necessarily the best objective card, but if you're playing with a faction that can go on lakes, then this objective is not very difficult to achieve. If you have Nordic, Polania, Tagawa, this is really something that is achievable at some point in the game. And technological breakthrough, some people might argue with me that this is not one of the better objectives. However, if we think about how we have ranked our resources and we have prioritized our stars, it is absolutely possible to get to the factory without any upgrades. In fact, most of the time I get to the factory without any upgrades. I've actually gotten technological breakthrough a number of times by accident, simply by rushing to the factory and not incorporating upgrades into my initial engine. So if you have any of these 9 cards, it is a pretty good bet that you're going to be able to get your objective done in this game. Now, the thing that makes the good objectives so good is that you don't have to go out of your way to achieve them. The remaining objectives do require you to go out of your way to some extent to get them, but these 6 are really bad because not only do they require you to go out of your way, but they also require you to hinder your gameplay in some way or to slow yourself down. And actively make the game more difficult for yourself. So if you get any of these 6 objectives, I would pretty much just chalk it up as a loss. And if you get multiple of them, then maybe think about going for one of those backup stars. But these 6 here, starting with Roll Up Your Sleeves with the Common Man, are just not good. The reason why Roll Up Your Sleeves is just so terrible is because it limits your economy. If you're planning on going for a stall strategy, this is basically impossible to do. Remember, building your economy is really important, not just for stalling, but it's also helpful to just have those points in general. And this requires that you limit yourself to $2, to 2 coin, until you can get at least 4 workers and 7 popularity. Now, the 4 workers is not that big of a deal, but 7 popularity is not easy. That is not easy to get to. So you're basically waiting to collect any money and making sure you spend all of your money until you are in tier 2, which is just not a very good strategy. The next bad objective is stockpile for the winter. Um, this objective is kind of crazy. This requires that you have 9 or more resource tokens on the same tile and that you have at least one of each type in that collection. So there are definitely strategies where you can get 9 of the same resource token on a tile, but going out of your way to bring resources to a tile to do this objective uh, is just not good for tempo. And not only is it not good for tempo, but you're not spending those resources. If you have to trade to get those resources to that tile, you are spending time and tempo and a coin to do that. And it would take you at least 2 times of doing that. It would take you at least 2 clicks or 2 uses of that action to do that. And this is just not something that is very strategically sound. In addition, you're also risking the fact that somebody could come and take all of those resources away from you. So as you're trying to like cart those resources to that one tile, that might be an indicator to another player that that is a tile they should go after, and they will take all of your things away from you, and you will be very sad. So stockpile for the winter, not something that I would encourage you ever go for. Okay, balanced workforce is something that, while it's not particularly terrible, I just don't find myself ever in a position to be able to do this. Having the same number of workers and recruits means you have to do this objective early, um, and you have to play with either an awkward number of workers to start the game, or you have to get recruits at an unreasonably fast pace. Um, I find myself getting to 5 workers before ever having the opportunity to get this card. And it's a card that I've never actually gotten before. I've actually never completed this objective because I never play with 4 workers or I never get recruits fast enough before I get new workers. So um, this is not something that's like impossible to do. It just requires that your opening is really awkward. And I wouldn't recommend sacrificing your opening moves to this particular card. Okay, become a beloved pacifist. As much fun as it is to challenge yourself to get this objective, it is just not realistic. Getting 13 popularity, an objective that requires you to get to tier 3, is too slow. It is so rare that you ever get 13 popularity. This is just not an objective that you should be going for. In addition, it requires you to spend all of your power, putting you in a pretty vulnerable position for people to attack you in the future. So if you do decide to do Beloved Pacifist, it should be your very last turn. You should be fighting with all of your power and then collecting this as the final star of the game. But getting to 13 popularity as part of your initial game plan should not ever be the way to go. Okay, these last 2 here, build local infrastructure and create a permanent foothold, just deal with the fact that building is not good. um, yeah, like building is just so bad that I can't justify going for these and spending time to build multiple structures, especially going out into the middle of the board, building these things, or waiting until you get to tier 2. Now, create a permanent foothold is especially bad because not only are you spending time building structures, but you're also not building mechs, which, if you think about our priority list, is completely backwards. Like, we should always focus on getting mechs before going for structures, meaning that create a permanent foothold is just not a good way to play the game. Like, I would never advise anybody to actually put themselves through going for that objective. While every faction has a different way of starting the game and has a different way of playing, um, these are the things that I have found to be generally true of every faction. Knowing how to start the game and making the most out of your first moves can really put you at an advantage over your competition. And if you follow these four principles, I think you'll be putting yourself in a good spot to be competitive in every game you play. The first thing that you need to think about when you sit down at the table to play Scythe, um, and you're given your objective cards and you're looking at the board, is trying to make a plan for getting your 6 stars. Again, regardless of if you are going for a race strategy or you're going for a stall strategy, it is very likely that you're going to have to be the person to play the 6th star to win the game. So you need to be thinking about that. If you have no idea which 6 stars you're getting, you're putting yourself at a massive disadvantage and you're not giving yourself clarity for the game. Deciding on the 6 stars that you're going to go for to start with um, allows you to build an engine and a strategy and to make the most of all of your moves to guide yourself toward that ultimate goal. The next thing you need to do within the first 3 or 4 turns is decide how many workers you're going to use. If you're going to use 8 workers, you can make that decision maybe a little bit later. But looking at your player mat, you need to make that decision pretty early on. You don't want to um, be moving around 2 or 3 workers at the beginning of a game aimlessly and not have a plan with how you're going to be able to produce all the resources that you need. Um, the reason why I have all of these different numbers at a different and like in a different color is essentially how much I would advise an intermediate or new player to use that. It is very rare that you would play a game with just 2 workers. There are definitely strategies where you can use 2 workers for the beginning parts of a game. If you have an engine already established with those 2 workers, there's a strategy with Albion where that's possible, but um, very rarely is that something that you're going to want to do. Playing with 3 workers is viable. You're obviously not going to be getting very many resources. And if you're going to be spending time getting 3 workers, you might as well get to 5. In my honest opinion, I have had not a whole lot of success working with just 3 workers, but it is certainly a viable strategy. Now, I would never recommend somebody play with 4. If you're playing with 4 workers, that means you're not playing with 5. And there is no added cost to using a 5th worker. So if you're playing with 4 workers, you are simply just spending more to get less. If you're going to be spending the power to produce, you might as well just have a 5th worker. Kind of in the same vein, I wouldn't ever encourage anybody to play with 6 or 7 workers. That popularity is a very steep cost for production, especially for factions that don't start with a whole lot of popularity. So if you are going to use 6 or 7 workers, you might as well go to 8. That is going to significantly boost your production. The extra coin is not that big of a deal. And if you can manage playing with 6 or 7 workers, you can absolutely manage playing with 8. So, yeah, 3, 5, or 8. The reason I have 8 in yellow is because I wouldn't recommend new players try to play with 8 workers. If you're an intermediate player and you know what you're doing and you can manage your resources well, you can manage your enlist bonus well. 8 workers is not too difficult to play with. But if you're a newer player or you're trying to just kind of figure out some of these opening systems, I would recommend playing with that 5 worker count. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for resource management. Like, you don't have to worry about running out of popularity. You don't really have to worry about running out of production. The next thing that I would recommend is that you are always moving your workers with mechs, especially if you're playing with 5 or 8. Oftentimes, I see new players like shifting around their workers in their home base without a mech, and they're spending multiple move turns to do that. Um, what I would instead encourage you to do is to either trade for enough metal to get a mech, or to just produce one or deploy one in your base at the start of the game so you can move those workers around more efficiently and use less turns getting the workers where they need to be. And this leads us to point number 4, which is developing a basic engine. Um, Obviously, if you're going to be moving your workers around your base, you want to do that as few times as possible. And you want to make sure that they're on the appropriate hexes for you to make the most of your player match. One side note for working with 8 workers, if you do choose to do this, and it's something that I do pretty often, is changing your perspective on what popularity is. If you're going to rush, or if you're going to use 8 workers, um, popularity becomes essentially a resource for you to spend. You're not trying to get to tier 2, you're not trying to, um, you know, multiply your score with that popularity. You're simply using popularity as a resource to further your engine. So here's an example of my opening basics in a game that I played recently with Crimea. Now, of course, on turn 1, you start with just your base 2 workers, and one of the things that makes Crimea really good, and one of the reasons why I'm using this for this example, is because they have all of the best resources available to them in their home base. Now, on turn 1, I'm trying to think about, of course, which objectives am I going to go for. If I had Foundations of the Empire, maybe that would encourage me to play with 8 workers earlier, right, to get that objective faster. So by turn 7, I've bounced between produce and trade to get the mech on the board, because obviously I'm not producing metal. So taking advantage of that trade action to get the mech on the board, and to get all 8 workers out early. You don't need to get all 8 workers out immediately, but you do need to decide how many you need for your engine. In this case, I decided to work with 8. Another good rule of thumb is to place your first mech wherever you have the most workers, because the workers can't move themselves as easily as you can move them with the mech. Moving on to turn 8, using that mech to distribute the workers out effectively to build the engine, where I can go, bounce between getting enlists and deploying mechs. And you'll notice that I have the appropriate number of workers for each of those actions. It is so common that I see players not bring enough workers to do the things that they want to do. So you can see my bottom row actions calls for 4 metal. So I'm going to make sure that I have 4 workers on this mountain. My bottom row action for enlist calls for 3 food. So I'm going to make sure I have 3 workers on that farmland. This is just really simple and something to make sure that you're never running out of resources to do what you want to do. So make sure you're thinking about how many workers you need to bring for your engine as you kind of develop that throughout the game. It should be noted that your engine is developed by at least turn 10, and you're getting your pieces out into the middle of the board to capitalize on opportunities to either go to the factory, or to get some combats, or to get some of those encounter tokens in the centralized space of the board. But you should be well enough developed to continue working on your stars, particularly the mech star and the enlist star, while you're doing other things in the middle of the board. That way you're not wasting time, dividing your attention between one or the other. You can do both at the same time. One of the best pieces of advice that I can give to a new player is to not give your enemy an easy combat. I have won so many games with players just moving their pieces to different places of the board without additional reinforcements, allowing me to just get super easy stars. Don't let your opponents do this. A skilled player knows the range of their opponent's, their mechs and their character, and you should not ever put just a lone mech or your character in a vulnerable position for your opponent to capitalize on an easy combat. So, for example, in this particular game, my opponent went for the encounter space here with his character, and I don't think he quite realized that I had Riverwalk, and that I could get to his character from where I was at. Obviously, this is going to be an easy combat for me because I can bring multiple things to this particular fight. And he also did not have Seaworthy at this point, so he could not retreat to the adjacent lake. So the Nordic player here made some mistakes by allowing me to just get a free star. So that is one of the best things you can do as a new player. Make sure you know the range of your opponent's mechs and their character, and to not let them have easy combats. Of course, this also means, on the flip side, if you have the opportunity to get an easy combat, that is the thing you should do next. Don't give up opportunities to get easy combats, because you never know if that piece is going to move away from your range again. So if there's a piece that is vulnerable and you can safely get there without having to worry about additional reinforcements coming for an easy combat for your opponent in return, then you should absolutely jump on that opportunity. One of the things that can really elevate your game as far as combat is concerned is knowing how much can be spent in a fight. And I know that sounds kind of obvious and silly, but being able to decide which fights you can and cannot win can help make some strategic decisions as far as moving your pieces to different areas of the board. Now, the way that you can decide, what the max is to spend in combat is this simple formula here. It's like grade school edition here. So max is going to be equal to 5 times the amount of combat cards that can be used in the fight. So like however many plastic pieces they have in the fight, plus their power level. So for example, if they had 2 plastic pieces and they had 7 power available for them to spend, that is a power total of 17. If they only have 1 unit there, that is 5 times 1 potential combat card, which is 5, plus a maximum of 7 is 12. You should never spend more than that in combat. I have seen this happen before where the aggressor in combat spends way more power than they actually need to spend because they didn't take the 2 seconds to calculate exactly how many points the defender had available to them. It's also worth mentioning that ties always go to the aggressor, meaning that you can safely spend your opponent's max, calculating out that tie so that you always win that combat. If you know that you have a 5 combat card and you have your max power available to you, then you will always win a one-on-one. If you're bringing 1 plastic piece to fight 1 plastic piece and you have all of those things available to you, even if your opponent maxes out at the 12, then they will still lose the combat because the tie goes to the aggressor. Just things to keep in mind. So these are some of my own personal statistics from my own online games following these exact principles. As you can see, I win combats way more than I lose combats. The reason why is because I don't put my pieces out in vulnerable spots for people to attack. And I also don't pick fights that I know that I can't win. If there's a potential that I could lose a fight, I'm probably not going to go to that fight. I usually only pick fights that I can guarantee that I'll win, which of course leads to a pretty high win rate because I'm out of range of losing fights that I can't win, and I only pick fights that I do win. Once you have become a bit more experienced with combat and you understand how to like min max your combat, it opens the door for a lot more mind games for you to be able to get away with spending less in a combat than you would probably do otherwise to guarantee the win. If somebody knows your habits, that you only ever attack when you know you can win, that might force them to just accept the loss, and they might try to cycle a 2 card, right? Because every time you spend power, you get a new card. So they might just try to cycle their 2, which means you can get away with spending maybe 3 or 4 combat power in that particular fight and saving your power and combat cards along the way. So don't be afraid to bluff, especially if you know that you're going into the fight with an advantage. Now, you do want to be careful if you're playing against somebody that you know likes to call your bluff. Maybe just sticking to those guaranteed victories is the way to go. Another big mistake that I see people make all the time is having naked mechs. Now, what exactly is a naked mech? A naked mech is something that doesn't have a worker with it. It's a mech that is not carrying workers along the way. So this is just a little screen grab from a game I played recently. And as you can see, in just this one frame, there are 4 naked mechs. Now, why are naked mechs so bad? Well, think about what a mech is doing, right? They win combats, you can move them in combat, and they can spread workers. These 3 mechs from Roosviet and this mech from Albion on the left, they're not doing either of those 2 things. It is much better for workers to hold individual hexes, not mechs, because mechs can be out doing other things. This is just a waste of a mech's potential, and you should never have a mech just standing holding a particular tile without also spreading workers along the way. This brings me to my final point, and the thing that will start getting beginners a lot more points in their games of Scythe. It's this idea that you need to spread out. Scythe is a territory control game, and if you spread out your workers efficiently, your territories can contribute up to anywhere from 20 to 40% of your total score. If you are not spreading out your workers, if you're not spreading out your units, that is 20 to 40% of your score that is just gone simply because you have consolidated your pieces. So make sure you are spreading out. You don't want to finish the game with very few tiles. You don't want to just be locked into your home base. You want to make sure you're spreading out and fighting for control over some of those really important hexes in the middle of the board. One thing that I would encourage you to do, once you have produced all of the metal and the food that you need for your mech stars and your list stars, or even just having the engine set up to be able to get those things without having to do any more additional work, you should be out in the middle of the board moving workers around, holding points. And just as a reminder, we shouldn't have mechs by themselves holding points. We should have workers holding those individual tiles, using the mechs to spread them around. So when you move your mechs, you should be trickling workers behind because that is just free points. You shouldn't be consolidating all of your pieces into one spot. You should be leaving workers along the way. Had I not gone for the trickle effect in this particular screenshot here, you can see there are 3 lone workers. One of them is on a factory tile, or the factory tile, that gives you 3 additional hex points. That would have taken away essentially 10 points from my final score, which in a rush game is a significant number. Oftentimes the difference between scores in a race game is in that 10-point margin. So had I not spread out my workers, I would have risked losing this game. One little side note and a little pro tip is to make sure you're leaving your workers on tunnels. This really limits the mobility of your opponents, and it can be really annoying to just plug up those tunnels. So, as you are trickling workers along, if you're able to leave them on tunnels, it does help your mobility out quite a bit and really hurts your opponent. If you found these tips and strategies helpful, I would strongly encourage you watch this video from Legendary Tactics and FOMOF. FOMOF is one of the game's top ranked players, and he actually articulates some of these ideas from a much, much higher level than I was able to provide in this video, given that he has like several thousand games of experience under his belt. One of the best ways that you can actually learn this game is by watching people who are better than you and by listening to their advice. That is how I got better, and it is how I was able to develop this video. So I would definitely check out some of these other strategy guides from higher level players. I will link this video in the description below, as well as some other resources that you can use to help strengthen your game, including a tier list for faction combinations, um, and a link to the Scythe Discord to get plugged into the community. And in the true spirit of Scythe's abrupt endings,